I messed up the words. Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new PJ Harvey record, the Hope 6 Demolition Project. UK singer-songwriter PJ Harvey here with her 9th full-length studio album. I'm pretty sure. Coming through 5 years after the release of her last record, Let England Shake, which has become one of her most celebrated albums so far. And it hasn't really aged that badly either in the half a decade it's been around. And with this new record over here, Harvey is sticking with a lot of the social themes that were on her last record, along with the very loose, kind of rootsy instrumentation. Though there are some noticeable differences. For one, the production is slightly different. It's not as reverby and washed out as her last record. The instrumentation here is certainly more upfront, which is good, but it's a little less mystical. And her socially aware sights have kind of shifting off of her home country and now are sliding in between the first world and the third world, evoking imagery of not only kids begging for money, saying dollar, dollar, but also a rundown downtown area that instead of being cleaned up and fixed and revitalized is, I guess, getting bulldozed over so that a Walmart can get thrown in there. Which, oddly enough, kind of reminds me of that Dead Kennedy song, Kill the Poor, which is this track about this, upper class, upper crust group of people's fantasy, this violent fantasy that they have, that they just wipe out all the poor people using like nuclear weapons or something. But now, instead of doing that, we get rid of the things that we don't like anymore with just public works projects, and we just kind of replace things that we hate and run down areas with box stores. Harvey jumps around from location to location and kind of gives us little vignettes and pictures and gives us the divide between where we're living and some other place where there might be some kind of great suffering going on. Musically, this album pulls way more from the world of blues. PJ Harvey and company actually sample a blues song quite blatantly on the song The Ministry of Social Affairs. And the saxophone plays a way stronger role on this project than it did her last album. Not only does it fit very snugly into the already existing instrumentation on a lot of tracks here, but occasionally the sax goes full sax attack in a series of very noisy and contorted solos throughout the track listing. Lyrically, I think this is a pretty interesting sequel to Let England Shake. Like I said, it brings a lot of those socially aware themes once again, and Harvey's language isn't too, flowery or poetic or whatever. She's not afraid to list out death tolls and call places shitholes. But her kind of eerie and emotional and very upfront delivery adds a lot of weight to her simple words. And I think part of the magic of this record comes through in the scenarios that she's referencing throughout this record too. On one track in particular, she depicts the life of an old woman who is essentially doing her best to maintain a group of houses in Kosovo after the war had either killed the people who were once living in these houses or drove them away from their native land. So now she's just kind of keeping these houses up the best that she can with the hopes that their inhabitants will one day return. And PJ Harvey doesn't play up the war or the location where this is happening or anything at all. It's like she takes the situation and turns it into more of an abstract, more of a fable type tale. It's got a bit of a Sisyphus rolling a boulder up a hill forever kind of vibe to it, or maybe even a Waiting for Godot type of thing. It's like she's not trying to be overly political on the track, even though what she's singing about is a direct result of politics. She's singing more about the situation and just being as in the moment as this old woman is. And there are other moments on this record where she's making what sounds like protest music, like on the very heavy and trudging Ministry of Defense. I like most of what's going on with this record conceptually, lyrically. It's musically that I think this album pales in comparison to PJ Harvey's last record. Some of these songs are super brief, and I actually think they kind of hurt the potential high points of this album, like on Community of Hope or Orange Monkey, or Medicinals. A track about the Washington, D.C. area, about how before it was touched by human hands, there were all these medicinals that grew in the area. And PJ, I guess, has this, I don't know, kind of weird psychedelic experience where these plants are talking to her, saying that they've always been here. And then all of a sudden the track just ends out of nowhere, and we're given the image of what seems like a homeless woman sipping liquor in a wheelchair, I guess, to kind of juxtapose the natural state that this place was once in versus the urban decay that it's suffering through now. An interesting point to make, but in my opinion, there was so much more that could have been pulled out of it lyrically and musically than the very sparse 2 minutes that this song lasts. And then there are other tracks here whose story and song I think could have been extended, could have used another musical passage to make the song more dynamic, or again, there just might have been more to the tale that PJ Harvey isn't telling us, like on Chain of Keys or on A Line in the Sand. And then there are several tracks where I think the instrumentation is super tedious, super repetitive, to the point where the simple musical ideas being broadcast here really get tired. This is especially true of the song The Ministry of Defense, whose very heavy, jutting guitar riff I don't think is as exciting at the end of the track as it is at the start of the track. And then there are a few instrumental choices that I think pull away from the punch of these tracks, like Near the Memorials to Vietnam and Lincoln, whose refrain is completely drumless. And even though there are so many vocals here and it seems like there might have been a few layers of guitars, the instrumental feels so collective, and yet it's so hollow because the percussion, the lower frequencies, are just really not represented. Though I do like the high-pitched drone the song progresses into during some of the verses. A couple of tracks on here that I do think are great instrumentally throughout are The Wheel, which has this rowdy, driving, and dirty rock and roll vibe to it with these just sweaty, bluesy horns. They honk throughout the track. The song also has kind of a messy, loose Velvet Underground vibe to it, very brittle rhythm guitars, and Harvey's vocals on the track are great. And the closing track as well, Dollar Dollar, which is one of the more subtle cuts here, but is still very fulfilling with its hypnotic and heavenly background vocals and a very soulful sax solo that closes the track out. I still enjoy this record a great deal, and for all these songs that I'm very critical of, there are elements that I like, whether it be a catchy vocal melody or an interesting lyrical idea or some instrumental chemistry or the production. It's just that I think this record could have been better. I think it could have been better. I think it could have been longer. I think it could have been more fleshed out. And the shortcomings of this album I think are especially obvious, not only given that PJ Harvey's last record was so great, but this album here shares so much in common with it. I think there are some cool fundamental ideas and foundations on this album, but there's just not enough meat on these bones. I'm feeling a light 7 on this record.
Transition! Have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best. You're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like. If you like, please subscribe or you'll die. It's a serious medical condition, everybody. Be careful. PJ Harvey, forever.